So, it's currently 12:03 a.m. I was not planning on making this video at all. I was not planning on making any videos or uploading any more videos to my YouTube channel at all, because those were all college projects, but I got really inspired while I was in the shower getting ready for bed, actually, and I just thought now would be as good a time as any to get my thoughts out into the world and onto YouTube. Tomorrow night, my boyfriend and I are going to go see the Dandadan Evil Eye movie, and it really got me thinking about like all the controversy that surrounded Dandadan whenever it first came out, and you know how it treated SA. That kind of led me down a rabbit hole of just Japan's culture surrounding SA and sexuality in general. It's not news for anybody who knows me, but the few anime and manga that I've read that I actually really enjoy have a lot to do with SA and sexuality and stuff like that, which it's you'll see why, okay? And as you can probably tell by the title of this video, some of my favorites are Chainsaw Man and Evangelion, and we're gonna get there. This is just kind of a Westerner's perspective. I have never been to Japan. All of my like experience with Japan has been through the media that it puts out and watching other people vlog about going to Japan. So yeah, anyway, please just, I don't know, just enjoy the video, I guess. I don't know. So to start off, I kind of want to give y'all kind of a bird's eye view of Japan's current culture around sex and sexuality. And again, take all this with a grain of salt because I'm not the most educated on the subject. This is just stuff that I could dig up that I think is interesting and relevant to the conversation that I want to start. First of all, I think a lot of times when we're thinking of Japanese media, we're thinking of anime. And when we think about anime, we probably think about fan service. Okay, and fan service is a really tricky and scary thing because I think a lot of good anime often get ruined by fan service. And the thing about fan service is that like the issue is that it sells, right? Fan service sells, and I really wish it wasn't this way, but it is. And so, you know, Japan really big on fan service, and I think that it's gotten a little bit better over the years, but like let's think about like early 2000s when internet culture was first starting to happen, like kind of bad, right? I also want to talk about like love hotels. Love hotels are extremely common in Japan, and I know that sometimes people go to love hotels and stay there just because it's cheap. Sometimes girls apparently rent them out for karaoke with their friends, but love hotels have been around since the 17th century in Japan, and according to Wikipedia, which is a little crazy in my opinion, but I hate to say it, but sex sells, right? And so again, Japan really has this culture, this big culture around sex that I think that Western America doesn't have. Like America, I think, you know, kind of, we are having issues in the sex culture surrounding it, and like I know that we had the whole thing with like purity culture and stuff like that, and then there's pushback against it because apparently being a sex worker is empowering to women, and I'm not here to comment on all that, but the thing is that like coming from a Westerner's perspective, having that casualness about, you know, going to a love hotel and having fan service in anime is a little wild to me, and maybe it is also just because I'm a Christian and I was raised Christian, and that's not something that I would want to put myself in, if that makes sense. But this leads into talking about Japan's SA culture, which is worse than people want to believe it is. Adi Harajuku posted a video, I think a couple weeks ago, where she talked about, you know, going to Japan, and she was kind of, you know, harassed by some people, or she has been harassed by some men. In Japan, you can't buy a phone that you can turn off the shutter sound when you take a picture because that prevents upskirting. Upskirting is still an issue, and there's signs saying not to upskirt, and the fact that Japan actually has to have like all female train cars in their subway system tells you that something is wrong, right? And so Japan, from my understanding, again, take this with a grain of salt. From my understanding, Japan doesn't have commentary culture about SA. They're trying to prevent it, but they're not really seeming to have any conversations about it, much in the same way that we had conversations about SA and stuff like that with the Me Too movement. Again, from what I understand, not a whole lot is being done to talk about SA and break the tabooness of it, and I'm wondering if it's because of how accepting their sex culture is. Does that make sense? And I know that Japan also is not the most accepting in terms of the LGBTQ community. I'm not going to address that either, but just in general, when it comes to heterosexual relationships, Japan seems to be more or less respectful, and not respectful in terms of SA, but like, you know, love hotels are super discreet and stuff like that, but they seem to be more accepting of sex culture than America is, where the Christian population in America is much higher here than it is in Japan, so, or at least it's more visible, I guess is what you can say, for sure. So there's going to be a lot more pushback on it here. And I will admit, you know, seeing how, just as an example, Marvel Rivals, how big Marvel Rivals has become, and how there has been conversations between boyfriends and girlfriends of girlfriends telling their boyfriend that they're going to break up with them if they use that Emma Frost or Invisible Woman skin. My boyfriend and I play Marvel Rivals together, and here's the thing, he respects women, so it's not an issue for us. Anyway, that's kind of what I want to say, is that, to be fair, the only leeway that I can grant these anime that I'm going to discuss is that Japan does have a much different culture surrounding sex and SA than we do in America, right? And I just think that's interesting. But there are times when we really need to address how people approach SA, such as in Dandadan. So I will be presenting this from the perspective of somebody who has not read the manga for Dandadan. I have only watched the anime, and I don't think I'm gonna get around to reading the manga because I don't feel that strongly drawn to the manga. So in the anime, for those of you who don't know, it centers on Momo Ayase and Okarun, and they have romantic tension, and basically the whole plot is kind of that, like, Okarun more or less gets possessed, and his balls get stolen by a grandma, a ghost grandma, actually. And so the plot is that they had to try to get his balls back, and then, you know, things happen. Turbo Granny, that's what they call her, the ghost grandma that stole his balls. She stole his balls as revenge for being SA'd, which is interesting. And then throughout the show, there's also these aliens that are trying to take Okarun's, as they call it, banana, and they're also trying to experiment on Momo in the way that you'd expect. That's like the gist of what I want to discuss. I think the anime, or the story itself, is honestly more of a romance slow burn than anything else, but again, the thing is that we're talking about how it approaches SA. So here's the thing. Dandadan uses SA as a plot point, but it uses it as a plot point more or less as a humorous plot point, which is like, I don't think I like that. The thing about it is that there's no conversation around what almost happens to Momo. There's a little bit of conversation about Turbo Granny's backstory and what she endured and why she sought revenge, but there's never any serious thought given to it. And I think that's the issue that a lot of people had whenever the series came out, particularly the anime, again, because the anime is kind of, you know, what blew up most recently. That's the issue that most people had with it, I think, is that it didn't approach SA with, like, grace and respect. And so when it's not treated with grace and respect, it's often treated, again, kind of more as fan service to draw people in. Again, granted, Dandadan's fan service really isn't as bad as a lot of other anime can be. I guess that's a step in the right direction, but, like, guys, come on, seriously. There are people who have actually been hurt by SA, and I know that's such, like, a crazy thing to say, but, like, the fact that it's kind of using it and, in a sense, desensitizing people to it is like, all right, let's actually think about this, right? And let me put the disclaimer. I actually enjoyed Dandadan because I think it was funny. I think that the tension between Momo and Okarun is great. I didn't like how they approached SA, but the thing is that I kind of know the nuances about it. I understand how bad SA can be, and for me, Dandadan doesn't change my perspective on SA. And so I believe that I can allow myself to enjoy Dandadan because I know how bad and how much pain can come to someone from SA. But I think that, and I'm going to say the same thing about Chainsaw Man, I think that people need to take more caution around these things, because otherwise we're going to get people who are desensitized to SA, which is not something that we need to be doing. I enjoyed Dandadan, and I'm probably going to continue to enjoy it unless they do something really stupid. And the thing is that whenever a show like this comes around, it does open up the floor for a lot of really good conversations with people, like I'm doing right now. Like, there's a lot of commentary to be made about how Dandadan approaches SA, and I think that if you can start those conversations with people, it might actually do some good and like tell people, hey, SA is a serious problem. SA is a serious problem in Japan and all over the world. Let's actually do something about it. Dandadan did not approach SA with really the respect that it needed to, and I don't like that part about it, but again, it doesn't change my perspective and it doesn't desensitize myself to it. I'm not immune to propaganda, and neither are you. Okay, so take care, make sure you're researching stuff, make sure you're having these conversations with people, because again, like I said, I think that is the danger with too many of these shows coming up, is that people aren't going to have these conversations because they're going to feel uncomfortable, right? Make sure that you're having these conversations with people to actually discuss the effects of having media like this come out, where SA is treated as more or less a joke of a plot point, right? Have those conversations. You are not immune to propaganda. There are some ways to combat, propaganda, and I think part of that is making sure to actually take a deep dive into things. And I think that's the problem with how Chainsaw Man is being treated, because, listen, Chainsaw Man, I believe, is a really great series because I read the manga, and the manga goes a lot deeper than the show does. So, Chainsaw Man, let's talk about it. So, Chainsaw Man, if you haven't heard of it, you've either been living under a rock or you don't watch anime, in which case, I don't know why you clicked on this video, but a brief overview if you haven't watched or read it. Chainsaw Man is a story of Denji, who is 15 or 16 years old when the story begins, and he gets more or less possessed by the Chainsaw Devil. Devils in this world are power scaled by how much people fear that thing. So for example, the Death Devil is supposedly the most powerful devil of them all, because most of the people in the world fear death, and they fear death a lot, right? The more people fear them, the more powerful the devil is, blah blah blah. Chainsaw Man is essentially manipulated into trying to find the gun devil, and some things go down, and Makima, who is the control devil, manipulates him, and in the manga we're kind of on like the second part of Chainsaw Man, where the War Devil is also in play. So, very broad overview of Chainsaw Man. Thing is, let me explain why I love Chainsaw Man so much, and why it has such a bad rap these days. When you watch the anime, and you don't have an English degree like I do, you're gonna watch Chainsaw Man and say, wow, this show is really freaky. And yes, but the thing is, the show is freaky because it's talking about how vulnerable young men can be groomed into being manipulated. Denji is essentially groomed into being Makima's dog, which is like a whole thing, and there's a whole lot of commentary concerning how trauma can make you hypersexual, and how hypersexuality can cause issues, and how, in essence, young men are vulnerable to anything that affirms their masculinity, right? And I think that might be an issue surrounding the Chainsaw Man community. People watch Chainsaw Man and they love it because there's fan service through Makima, right? And like, she affirms their fantasies. I'm just gonna leave that there. I think Chainsaw Man just gets a bad rap because people don't have critical thinking skills. They are the people who, in 10th grade English class, said the curtains are blue because they're blue. Listen, if you're saying that, maybe you're right. But what it tells me is that you're not willing to dig deeper to find the deeper meaning and learn a lesson from it, right? And so I think a lot of the surface level community is particularly attached to the anime. I don't really see a whole lot of the freaky community reading the manga, right? They're more attached to the anime because it doesn't really go as deep as the manga does, at least not yet. And in essence, anime surface level Chainsaw Man really is just kind of giving people this power fantasy, pun intended, of being a dog for someone, which is like, you know what, you do you, man, that's fine. But let's actually take a deeper look at Chainsaw Man. Chainsaw Man has, like I said, a lot of commentary about how vulnerable young men are, the consequences of hypersexuality, the consequences of unresolved trauma, right? And how people can be manipulated. That's like been the big thing across like Chainsaw Man Part 1 with Makima and Chainsaw Man Part 2 with Yoru, the war devil, is just that people can be manipulated, particularly by sex, right? I think that Chainsaw Man is a really important story for people to read, so that they can understand the consequences of these things, but people aren't willing to look deeper than that because it makes them uncomfortable, right? But here's the thing, I'm here to start those conversations, right? I want to start these conversations and make people uncomfortable, kind of lessen the taboo on these subjects so that people who need help with these things can actually get help. And so this particularly goes for people who have experienced SA, people who have been groomed, people who have been manipulated, stuff like that. Like, listen, man, it's tough. I'm not here to shame you for this because you're the victim. I'm not victim shaming at all. These are things that need to be talked about so that we can prevent them. So anyway, moral of the story for Chainsaw Man is that a lot of the fans are very surface level with it, which is kind of doing more harm than good. Like, let's be real. I think if we actually took the time to dig a little bit deeper into what Chainsaw Man is saying, even if it's with the anime, because the anime does kind of address it, if we took the time to actually dig deeper into what the anime is trying to talk to us, a lot of good conversations are going to pop up that will address a lot of things, and make people feel more validated in their feelings, make people feel more comfortable sharing their experiences and stuff like that. And so yeah, basically what I'm trying to say is that we need to have a more analytical thought process when it comes to digesting anime that are considered freaky. And like, I'll be honest, like there are some anime that I've heard about. I am very careful with the anime that I choose to watch. The only one that I think was a mistake was Devilman Crybaby. Anyway, I think that there are some hidden gems of anime that we can watch and have conversations about, just like Dandadan, just like Chainsaw Man. And if there's one anime that I think we really need to have an analytical eye for, it's Evangelion. So yes, Evangelion, we finally made it. This is potentially my favorite anime of all time. Let me explain why. There's so much to dissect in it, and it goes a lot into relationships, interpersonal relationships. That's basically the underlying theme, is being vulnerable enough to have a relationship with somebody. Are you vulnerable enough to have a relationship with somebody? Let's find out, right? Brief overview of Evangelion. So Evangelion is very schizophrenic at times, and I mean that more or less literally, because Hideki Anno, who is the creator of Evangelion, has schizophrenia, as far as I'm aware. But let me make it clear, I'm talking about the Evangelion anime, and I will be addressing both the end of Evangelion and the 2 finale episodes. I'm not talking about the rebuilds because I haven't watched the rebuilds, and I don't know if I'm ever going to get around to it. Essentially, all you need to know about the basic overview of Evangelion is that there are these aliens called angels that are attacking Earth. So this company called Nerve creates these Gundam suits that are actually alive, and they tell 13 and 14-year-old kids to pilot these suits to kill the angels. Alright, so there's also an underlying group of people in NERV who are trying to merge the entirety of humanity into one consciousness. And I'll talk about that when I discuss the two different endings. But Evangelion gets a very interesting rap in the anime community, and particularly from people who only watch it at surface level. Evangelion is a very hard anime to watch only at surface level, because there's so much thinking that you have to do, especially in the later episodes, to understand what's going on, that honestly, I find it impressive if people actually don't take Evangelion at a deeper level and they only take it at surface level. Those folks who do take it at surface level, they probably think the show is a little freaky for a couple reasons. Number one, Misato. They call Misato mommy, and I'll explain why in a second, but to some extent I get it, but also, like, let's actually examine why she presents herself like that, right? And number two, the hospital scene. I'm saving that for later because I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't watched Evangelion. Evangelion, again, really can get a bad rap because of those two things. And at that point, it's like, what is Evangelion even about, bro? I think a lot of people who watch Evangelion actually are able to understand it at a deeper level and are able to have these conversations. So, I'm going to be taking Evangelion from a very psychological perspective, because there's a lot of that going on. I'm going to be talking a lot about how relationships happen and attachment styles, so get ready for me to kind of get excited and spiel about this, because attachment styles, love learning about attachment styles. So, really brief overview of the attachment styles, because I will be labeling most of the characters with certain attachment styles so that we can talk about it. Secure attachment means that when you were a child, you were well taken care of. If you cried or if you expressed a need, that need was usually met. And so what that means for you later down the line is that in your relationships that you have with other people, whether romantic or not, you feel very secure in them, in knowing that if you have to, you can take care of yourself, but also I can express my needs to these people and they might actually help me get what I need, right? So that's secure attachment. Secure attachment is what we want. Anxious ambivalent attachment is when you are a child and your caregiver sometimes and sometimes didn't meet your needs. You would cry, sometimes they would come over and, you know, like give you food or whatever, and sometimes they would just ignore you. So what that means is that later down the line, you don't know if the people you're in relationships with are going to meet your needs. So you're going to latch onto them and really hope and pray that they're going to meet your needs. And these are the people who are going to be labeled as clingy in relationships. They're going to hold on to you and say, like, if you leave me, you probably hate me. You're ignoring my messages, you probably want to break up with me. Stuff like that. No hate to people who have insecure attachments. Understand that this is not your fault for having these attachments, right? This is just how things are, right? So that's anxious ambivalent attachment. Avoidant attachment is when you were a child and your needs were pretty much never really met. So you cry, nobody would come. People would just ignore you. You had to learn how to fend for yourself. And so what that means later down the line in your relationships, you are going to be labeled as distant in your relationships. You distance yourself from your partner or your friends or whoever because you're thinking, these people are not going to meet my needs, so I'm just going to do it myself. People can also be considered independent, but again, this causes issues later down the line because a relationship is supposed to, you know, have people going back and forth, sharing their needs and trying to meet each other's needs. Relationship is not 50-50, by the way. A relationship is 100-100 and expecting nothing back in return. That's a whole other spiel. Point is, again, if you have anxious ambivalent or avoidant attachment, I'm not shaming you. These are just conversations that we have to have so that we can lessen the taboo on having these kinds of attachment styles. Those are the attachment styles. And we're going to discuss the majority of the characters in Evangelion and how these attachment styles show up and how it affects them. Okay, so Shinji reminds me a lot of Denji from Chainsaw Man, and if I remember correctly, Tatsuki Fujimoto actually more or less maybe took inspiration from Evangelion. I'm pretty sure he at least, you know, watched Evangelion, that sort of thing. Shinji has relationship issues, I would say he's anxious, ambivalent, clingy, you know. Actually, I would say he's dysregulated. So dysregulated is the secret fourth option, and it basically happens when there's trauma surrounding the primary caregiver and the child in childhood. And there's a lot of different ways that dysregulated attachment styles can show up. People are very back and forth on that one. But anyway, point is, Shinji is very interesting to study because his whole life he is craving for a relationship with somebody, but he doesn't know how to have a relationship with somebody. And this is due in part to when he was a child, his mother dies, and his father, Gendo, basically just brushes him aside, right, in favor of Rei. And so, again, this is why I say he's probably more dysregulated, because he doesn't necessarily cling on to people. I mean, he does, but he's also very distant because he doesn't know how to have a relationship with people. But the thing about Shinji is that he's very much like Denji because he is easily manipulated by relational acts. We see this in the series, close to the series finale, the episodes where Misato kind of takes advantage of Shinji's want and need for a relationship and makes him get into the Ava unit, you know, like, get in the Ava, Shinji. But anyway, both Denji and Shinji have been manipulated, more or less sexually, by somebody who wants something out of them. And for that reason, I actually think that Misato and Makima are very similar. Now, I will say, disclaimer, Makima is a terrible person. I'm gonna leave it there. Misato is a very complex person. Like, if daddy issues were a person, it's Misato. There's a reason why people call her mommy, and it's because of what happened between Misato and Shinji, of her acting like a mother figure to Shinji, and Shinji not knowing the difference between, like, a mother figure, a friend, and a girlfriend, I guess, for him, and a boyfriend later down the line. But Misato is an interesting case. She definitely, probably, maybe has anxious ambivalent attachment, but the thing is that it primarily just shows up in her relationship with Kaji. And her thing with Kaji is that is pretty much defined by her daddy issues. Her father died when she was young, and in her talk with Kaji, whenever they're walking, she says that I was looking for my dad in my relationships. I was looking for my dad in you, Kaji. Again, that gets interesting just because of that one scene. But Misato is, again, another case of somebody who just doesn't know how to have a relationship with somebody. And again, this is kind of the underlying theme of Evangelion, is that, are you willing to be vulnerable enough to have a relationship with somebody? And so this goes back to kind of me thinking that Shinji is more dysregulated, because he doesn't seem to be willing to be that vulnerable with people, but he's still craving having a relationship with somebody, right? So that's why, you know, he kind of seeks a relationship in Misato, Asuka, and Rei, because these are the people that are readily available to him and give him affection, right? And also, we can talk about Kaworu, but he doesn't show up until the end, so kind of leaving him out on that one. But Misato and Shinji are already very similar because they don't know how to have a relationship with people, but they crave it. Like, it's the thing in their lives that they're so dead set on getting. Asuka is a very interesting case because I would like to put her in that category too, but I think she's more set on getting approval from somebody rather than actually having a relationship. I think the reason why she wants to have a relationship with somebody is because she wants that approval within the relationship. So Asuka, I would say, has more mommy issues than anything else. But that said, she definitely has avoidant attachment because her mom died when she was young. But to add on top of that, the reason why she seeks approval from people and to prove that she's enough is because her mom, when she was alive, replaced Asuka with a doll. That's because she had, you know, mental issues, whatever. But Asuka grew up thinking that she wasn't enough. Like, Asuka, there's those scenes where Asuka is like pleading with her mom to pay attention to her, but the mom is only paying attention to the doll, right? And so Asuka, while still being avoidant, seeking a relationship with somebody, but only for that approval. And she harbors a lot of self-hate for that, which I think is kind of on par with how that conflict can show up in how you want a relationship with somebody, but you really don't, but you do because you want approval. There's a lot of self-hate in that, I think. And so Asuka, she puts up a front of being very strong and, you know, trying to be worthy of things, but she really feels like she's not, which I think is a thing that a lot of people do. And again, no shame in this. I'm trying to start conversations. This is just a trauma response, really, and a response from growing up with these ideas that I'm not good enough, but I have to be, so I'm gonna try to be, but I know that I never will be, you know? So Asuka has, again, a lot of issues, especially considering that she also seeks approval from Kaji, which Kaji is crazy. Like, Watermelon Guy, even Shinji seeks approval in Kaji. But I think Kaji is one of the more stable characters in the show. We're not even going to talk about it because he did. Okay, anyway, Asuka seeking approval in Kaji came down to her wanting approval from him sexually, which it kind of goes into the whole conversation I had about Chainsaw Man, is that yes, young men are very vulnerable to being groomed and anything that affirms their masculinity, but so are young women, especially in this day and age where your worth a lot of the times will come from whether or not you're looked at as a sex object. Like, again, a lot of conversations to be had here. And the sad part about it, about how Asuka searched for this in Kaji, is that it's really only like briefly mentioned in like 1, maybe 2 episodes in like a brief conversation she has with Kaji. She does repeatedly say like, hey, is Mr. Kaji here? Or like, oh, are you talking to Mr. Kaji? That kind of thing. It does bring up a separate conversation about how young girls find approval. And again, that is, I think, due in part to our culture pushing the idea that women are sex objects, and if you're not a sex object, you're not a woman, which is a whole other conversation, and it's really, really unhealthy. And, you know, I think the Barbie movie did a really good job addressing this, but anyway, so all this to say, Asuka is a very interesting case because she is definitely avoidant, but she still really, really wants to have a relationship with somebody. So, really interesting dynamic there, and I think it's portrayed pretty well. I don't really have a lot to say about Ritsuko because Ritsuko is one of those characters that I never really knew what to think of. Ritsuko, I think, is the simplest form of wanting to have a relationship with somebody in how she searched for a relationship in Gendo when it clearly wasn't happening. So Ritsuko, I think, is just a very simple woman. She wanted a relationship and she pursued it, and it didn't really end up working out, right? Gendo, though, I don't really have a whole lot I can say about him because I haven't put a lot of thought into him as a character, but I find it really interesting in how he never really did get over Yui. And, you know, he literally recreated Yui twice, right? In Rei and in Eva Unit 1, which is like, it gives me chills to think about because that's so freaky, bro. Like, and when I say freaky, I mean like scary. Gendo never got over Yui. I think because Yui might have been the only good, genuine relationship he had, and that's why he favors Rei over Shinji, because Rei looks the most like Yui, reminds him the most of Yui, that sort of thing. Gendo is like the definition of deadbeat dad, but he there's a lot to say about him. But again, I didn't really think him through because I haven't really considered him a lot as a character. All this to say, the hospital scene. I wouldn't say this is where Shinji's issues peaked, but it's definitely one of the biggest displays of his issues relationally. Shinji doesn't know how to have a relationship with somebody, so he resorts to something that at that point isn't even like an artificial relationship. It's just something that does to make himself feel better, I think. And it's like, there's that scene is, there's a lot to say about that scene. And hey, you know, I'm now remembering that scene in Chainsaw Man. I think I blocked it out. But again, it really goes to show that, like, Denji and Shinji are so similar, and they really, really do try their best to have relationships with people, but they just don't know how. And so they seek it out in the most insane ways possible, whether it's allowing themselves to be manipulated, whether it's instances like what happened in the hospital and what happened in the alley with Asa / Yoru. I guess it was Yoru. It's just like, man, people get desperate. Okay, people do crazy things, and people do things that we probably shouldn't do anyway. But that's just another issue with the world, is that, you know, people are not willing to be vulnerable for relationships, and so they never do end up getting good relationships. I think that Hideki Anno really truly did create something that is very important and that a lot of people need to watch and have like a full-length discussion on, because especially if you're in like your early mid-20s, when it's so hard to form friendships with people because it's like awkward and like schedules conflict and stuff like that. Like, relationships are so important for us as a species. We are created to be social creatures, and it's why it's so important to have these spaces like church settings or college settings or even like work discussions for us to connect with other people. And it's so frustrating to me because you look at Evangelion on the surface and it's like, this is a freaky show. Misato is mommy. And I'm like, no, dude. Like, you do not want her to be your mommy, bro. Like, Evangelion is legitimately, it's so important, especially in this day and age when people are so isolated with social media, and they've been so isolated since the pandemic. Like, you do not understand how important it is for us to have good relationships. Like, it legitimately affects our physical health if we are not in relationship with people, in community with people, like, on a daily basis, right? So anyway, that's the main thing about Evangelion. And so that all culminates into the last 2 episodes and the movie for the Evangelion series. So the original ending is the movie, but they had to cut it down because of studio issues, and so the final 2 episodes are the product of that. So basically, like I mentioned briefly earlier, the people at NERV try to merge everybody's consciousness in the entire world, okay? And so the TV show ending, what happens is they succeed. Shinji learns how to be in relationship with people. He learns how to work with other people in that way. And so humanity succeeds in merging consciousnesses with people. And sounds kind of like a happy ending, but, you know, if you've watched the show, you know, it's bittersweet. People finally know how to be in a relationship with each other, but everybody's individuality is stripped away. So the finale of the anime poses the question, are you so willing and so desperate to be in a relationship with somebody that you're going to let your individuality be stripped away? Oh, it's so good. It's good stuff. And then the end of Evangelion, which is the movie, it was the original ending. What happens is that Shinji and Asuka manage to not like merge consciousness with the rest of humanity, kind of just by like refusal, I guess, and unwillingness to. So it's implied that the rest of humanity can kind of eventually become individualized again because they declined. That one is really interesting because it's like, Shinji, you did not get what you wanted. You didn't get a relationship with people, but you protected your individuality in the process. So again, I think it's so interesting. Like, the 2 endings could honestly work for the entirety of the show. I think either ending is valid, and it's really up to you to decide which one you like better. Like, I know a lot of people pick the movie ending because it's a lot less schizophrenic than the anime ending, both of them pose good questions and pose prompts that's like, are you willing to sacrifice your individuality to be in a relationship with somebody? Or are you going to learn how to be vulnerable with somebody instead of sacrificing your individuality? Oh, it's so good, okay? Listen, it's so good. If you haven't watched Evangelion, I'm literally begging you to watch it at this point. There's also the whole thing about biblical symbolism that I'm not going to get into. I'm a Christian, so I'm big on biblical symbolism. But the funny thing is that Hideki Anno was like, oh, I really didn't mean anything by, angels and Lilith and Adam and stuff like that. I just thought it was cool. What are you talking about, bro? Anyway, I think that concludes my rant on Evangelion. That's generally my whole analysis of Evangelion. Like, I don't even know if I'm going to make a video on Evangelion at this point. I wanted to at some point, but I think I said what I needed to say, is that, like, Evangelion gets a very weird rap from people because of Misato and the hospital scene, but you have to dig deeper. The show literally requires you to dig deeper. If the only thing you know about Evangelion is Misato and the hospital scene, then I understand why you think it's so freaky and why you won't watch it. But brother, I'm literally begging you. Like, Misato and the hospital scene are integral to the themes of show, right? That's my spiel on Evangelion, and I think that kind of going down this scale of first talking about Dandadan, and then Chainsaw Man, and then Evangelion kind of gives you a glimpse into how badly sex and SA is treated by Japan and its media, and how well it can be addressed if we can look a little bit deeper into it. You know what I mean? And there's so much more I could say, but it's really getting late, and I really hope that my point came across well. I legitimately did not have a script for this at all. It's just that I was really inspired, had a lot of things on my mind about Dandadan particularly, and it just spiraled. Does any of this make sense? Let me know in the comments. Listen, I just want you to know that we need to keep starting conversations, okay? Like, don't be afraid to have conversations about the taboo things. It's how we make progress, okay? So, have those conversations, watch Evangelion, don't watch the Dandadan movie like me and my boyfriend are gonna go to see tomorrow, whatever. Just remember, you are not immune to propaganda. Protect yourself, have conversations, talk to people who have experience with these types of things, and do what you need to do. So, see y'all never, whenever, I don't know, I have a headache, I gotta go to bed.